and a very beautiful community. We're going to talk about the Trump-Harris debate, but in a wider and more contextualized way that gives you more, I hope, than just a scorecard, because you can do that for yourself, but rather places things into a kind of historical and cultural context that leaves us enriched and maybe reassured, or maybe more worried. And more worried is also okay if we're holding each other's hand and telling each other things that, if they're alarming, they're also true and important for us to acknowledge. So let's get going with this. Because of my health struggles, it's always difficult to find just the right moment to record these, even if it's from bed, because I want to be able to not just sit here and robotically get through a few remarks, but to engage you so that you feel that we're actually addressing ourselves to the world around us rather than making points. So let's try this. What I've jotted down for us to mention is what bigger historical context the debate's located in, what kind of political types were conflicting in the debate, a couple of remarks about how we're all approaching this from a position of our own online bubble. Then I want to talk about a few details from the debate that I think are interesting. And then we'll talk about what the next few weeks of the race hold and how to think about them. So if you want to think of the Trump-Harris debate in context of democratic decline, then what the debate was is basically centrism, and this is a line I've actually written down, centrism beating incompetent right populism in an age of centrist collapse. So that's to say, we have a kind of technocratic centrist malaise that in this instance is represented by Kamala Harris. And then we have a destructive rebellion against it that promises false solutions and is in most ways, if not in all ways, worse than the thing it is trying to critique. And the reason I'm saying this isn't because Kamala Harris has particular strengths or weaknesses as a political candidate. This is above individuals. I'm saying this because Kamala Harris's presidency would be transitional, and at the end of it, these key feelings of trust that we often talk about, right? Powerlessness, sense of betrayal, and worst of all, a sense of opacity about your political institutions. These will be worse in 5 years. Now, these will be way worse in 5 years if Trump has a second term than they would be under a Kamala Harris presidency. But what I'm saying is that the center of politics today does not offer a fix to the challenge of democratic decline we're facing, and is in many parts, it's in many ways itself the cause of the democratic decline. That doesn't translate, because history is complex, into solutions. I'm not sitting here and doing a kind of, and this is going to be very mean, a kind of Kyle Kulinski, a lovely left-wing commentator on YouTube. Because I'm not saying if you just took away Kamala Harris and replaced her with Bernie Sanders, or a Bernie Sanders from a few years ago, these problems would be solved. There is no political candidate of any persuasion who could solve them. Some get closer, others are further away, but not every historical problem has a solution, and that's important to understand. So that's the historical context. The political context is that we really saw a debate between what I would call a very effective operator, because Kamala Harris is not extraordinary at understanding big picture politics. She's not extraordinary at leadership communication. She's not extraordinary at talking policy. And you saw that in the CNN interview. That was worse than the DNC speech and worse than this debate performance against Trump, which was superb from her, actually. We'll talk about how it was superb. So we've got a kind of a political operator who is got extreme proficiency at sitting around the table and being engaged with her team around what are the 7 things that need to be hit, how do we hit them, what's our plan, okay, here it is, right, I'm going to take it and I'm going to do it. Now, that's not the only political talent Kamala Harris has, but that's an important talent. In other words, 99 humans out of 100 couldn't even begin to sit around the table, grasp the 7 things that need to be done, and then go out on national, international television against a very difficult opponent, an erratic opponent and a formidable opponent, and then do it, and then deliver. Now I want to admit a potential bias on my part that I think won't affect my analysis, but because it slightly could, I'm going to mention it. I was just looking through old messages on the Patreon platform and in my DMs, because I've been promising a couple of more personal Q&As, and so I was just sort of collating personal questions. And one of the questions was, when do you cry? And even though I'm going through a lot health-wise, if I thought about what were the last few times I cried, they were all positive. In other words, I tend to cry when I'm happy about something, not when I'm sad. And the thing that most easily makes me cry at the moment, this is just the phase I'm in, and I'm approaching my mid-40s, is human beings showing remarkable growth. And that also plays a part in my small consulting practice, something I do, 2, 3, 4 hours a month, whereby I am passionate and moved by people not just realizing their talent, but developing their talent for realizing their talent. So I have a real bias for that. And actually, I love that I have a bias for that. And as a result, I'm going to be very moved by this debate performance from Kamala Harris. Why? Because in the DNC speech, she showed that she could do the one-on-many non-dialogical performance, the one-way traffic speech, which she couldn't necessarily do before on the high level. She delivered. Then she did an interview on CNN that went badly and included quite a bit of word salad. And the test here was going to be, is she going to show a capacity for dialogical communication? Boom, 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 boom. When stuff is coming back at you, you have to give back and it comes back at you. So this type of throwing about the ball communication. And she did it. And that again constitutes not just growth, but a kind of rapid growth. It doesn't mean she can't relapse and have a bad performance in a second debate. But it showed growth, and therefore it's very difficult for me not to be touched by that, and especially if that growth takes the form of a woman being formidable in public. And here we need to acknowledge that it's bloody hard to deal with a bully in public, an erratic bully, because you can overreact to them, and then you look like you're a little bit unhinged and triggered. You can underreact and then you look passive. Or you can sort of ignore them, pretend they're not there, which is rather what Hillary Clinton did in her debates with Trump. And despite the conventional mainstream media wisdom, I don't think Hillary won these debates, whereas Kamala Harris clearly won the debate last night. And the reason Hillary didn't win is she cut off from Trump and simply said, I am the only smart person here, so I'm just going to talk at you about policy, about issues, about what I'm going to do, and I don't know how to engage with that, so I'm just going to look here. And you can't do that. You can't ignore the bully, you can't underreact, you can't overreact. So it's a very difficult balance. And I do also think that handling a bully like that is easier for a male than for a female, because you're going to be judged a lot worse as a woman than you would be as a man for overreacting to the bully. You know, a man coming over the top of Trump could go further and get away with more. So the fact that Kamala Harris avoided the traps of overreaction, underreaction, and just ignoring the bully is very impressive. So what happened basically, therefore, is that she treated him as a political heavyweight, as a formidable opponent, somewhat uncontrollable, an erratic opponent, but a formidable opponent. And the performance against him had to be a sort of cup final for her. Whereas he didn't treat her like that. He didn't take her as seriously as she took him. And he paid for that. Now, a couple of almost epistemically grounding things before we get into the debate itself. There is an increasing minority opinion that I'm seeing. I'm seeing more of it among pro-Ukraine people who follow me on Twitter than I'm seeing it on YouTube, but it's there. I don't know what kind of demographic it is. It could be just a 5% demographic. But it's a demographic that says that Trump could actually be good for Ukraine. So I want to tackle that, but without dismissiveness in a way that might enrich us. Now, I think that that view is misguided. And I think the reason it's misguided doesn't need to be articulated by me because it's obvious enough. And indeed, Putin agrees that Trump would, on balance, be a better candidate for him than Kamala Harris. We've discussed the complexity of Putin's view on this, as I see it, and that's that in most cases Kamala Harris will be worse for Putin than Trump would. That's one thing Putin thinks. Putin then thinks that nearly all the best case scenarios for him would occur under Trump, but he also fears that some of the worst case scenarios for him could occur under Trump because Trump's erratic and he could go further potentially than Kamala Harris might in standing up to Putin. That's questionable, but doesn't matter because I'm just conveying to you what Putin thinks. So Putin supports Trump in 2024, unlike in 2016 where he saw Trump just as a disruptor. So when you think about that 5% demographic who think that Trump's going to be good for Ukraine, it's very important to make a distinction between history refuting your position and history just revealing your position as one that contingently fails. Because there are no guarantees in history, right? It is historically possible that Trump, through some bizarre set of scenarios, proves better for Ukraine than Kamala Harris. That doesn't mean that it makes any sense to prefer him. It just means that history isn't entirely predictable. It just means that doing what is overwhelmingly the right thing is not going to work out well for you relative to the option of doing the wrong thing 100% of the time. There's a 2%, 5%, 10% of the time scenario is going to go against you, right? Imagine some kind of crazy scenario in which is actually impossible, in which Ukraine simply refused to resist Russia's invasion. Ukrainians just stood up and said, yeah, come along and take over our government and install Mr. Medvedchuk or whoever you want to install. That's not just impossible, but that's an absolutely catastrophic thing for Ukraine to have done, and nobody sane would think that that's a good idea, even if it were possible, which it isn't. However, I mean, is it possible that Ukraine gets taken over like this by a destructive Russian imperialism, but that most Ukrainians survive this scenario and the country loses its political sovereignty, but most Ukrainians continue to exist biologically, whereas in the alternative hypothetical scenario, the West backs Ukraine all the way, and that leads to a global nuclear exchange, and virtually all humans disappear. You can't say that's impossible. It's possible. It's just not likely. It's very unlikely. But doing the right thing could lead to history contingently refuting the choice you have made. And this is where this distinction between history contingently failing what you've chosen to do, rather than refuting it. This is where this distinction between refutation and failure matters. If history refutes what you've chosen to do, that means history proves that it was systemically the wrong thing to do. In other words, it's something you shouldn't have done. But if history fails you on the choice you've made, that's different to refutation. It just means that contingently it didn't work out, even though it might well have been overwhelmingly the right thing to do, right? If the right thing to do is going to work out well for you 999 times out of 1,000, and then history delivers you that 1 out of 1,000, it doesn't mean it was the wrong thing to do. It just means that history has failed you. But it hasn't refuted you. In other words, it still remains the case, even if that 1 in 1,000 is what comes up, that if you rerun the scenario, it'd be 999 that, still going to go in your favor over and over and over again most of the time. So that's the distinction. Refutation means that there's something structurally, systemically wrong in the decision you made, such that you shouldn't have made it. It might be that not everything was known or knowable for you, but you still shouldn't have made it. Whereas if history just fails you, that is in no way a refutation of the decision that you've just made. It's an important distinction. I'm sorry I was so bumbling in articulating it, but it matters. Now, a little bit of epistemic grounding. It's really important to understand that what we're talking about when we say who's won the debate isn't who's made the points we like the most, or who's persuaded us best, or persuaded me best if I were an American citizen, but who's had the most positive impact potentially on the outcome of the election. You see, you've got to be clear about that. And I spent a little bit of time in the night, having watched the debate, just texting back on social media platforms to people saying, hey, no, you've got to get this. It's not a matter of whether Kamala Harris's answers satisfy you and me on Ukraine, for instance, but whether they are compelling vis-a-vis the outcome of the election. And we'll come back to the Ukraine topic shortly, which actually turned out to be Trump's best or Trump's least worst performing topic. So there's always this risk of us sort of navel gazing in a kind of algorithmic bubble and blinding ourselves. So let's not do that. I had a minor squabble with somebody on Twitter who recently exploded on YouTube in the Trumposphere, and he was a something like a YouTube advice guy. Here's how you do well on YouTube, was his shtick before. But then he did a few political videos, toxic political videos. They exploded, and he's kept on doing them, sort of really destructive, toxic MAGA videos. And he criticized me for something I said on Twitter, so I responded by saying, sorry, it just looks like you've lost your way in the algorithm. It was hard for you, a big wave came your way, but it swallowed you up and then you lost your rudder. And he said, me, obviously, and unfollowed me, and I unfollowed him, having taken a look at his content, because it's so manipulative. But he's jumped from nearly no followers to 300,000 followers virtually overnight by doing sort of really dark Trumposphere politics. He ran a poll among his followers who won the debate, and it was 92% thought Trump won it. Right? It shows how dangerously bubbles work. Then I also clicked into Morning Joe, and I watched, very atypically for me, Morning Joe, which is a wonderful illustration of centrism and the delusions of centrism. And Morning Joe is often a program that is about talking to a world that isn't really there. It's very instructive to catch it again. Debate summary now. Trump comprehensively lost the debate. Harris handled the bully well. Trump was ill-disciplined, kept getting baited and missing opportunities. And Kamala Harris managed to sustain and prolong exchanges on issues which were her strength and move past issues or bait Trump during discussion of issues that were her weaker issues. And Trump simply wasn't doing what she was doing. She was dodging and jumping off topics when she wasn't strong on them, trying to throw some bait at Trump to derail him. And instead of doing the same, he just kept falling for the bait virtually every time. So it was sort of, here is a point, oh, by the way, Trump cares only about himself. And then Trump, rather than responding to the point, responds on the personal critique of himself and thereby just proves that he only cares about himself. The debate details. Let's start with body language and then we'll go into something more concrete, because body language with women politicians obviously raises important issues of feminism. So we'll talk about it. So somebody who is in some ways can be an unlikable guy in some of the way he communicates. Frank Latz, the pollster and the political consultant, he wrote this on Twitter, and I want to analyze it properly without us being triggered by it. He wrote this during the debate. If she wants to win, Harris needs to train her face not to respond. Because when Trump was speaking, Harris was pulling softly incredulous grimaces and smiling. It feeds into a female stereotype, he says, and more importantly, risks offending undecided voters. The Twitter sphere exploded at him for misogyny, and I didn't find that constructive, even though what he's written is wrong. So how do we talk about why it's wrong? Well, by going gently here and actually conceding some important points in principle. Now, the first is a feminist point. A lot of the population, a lot of the biologically male population, will be triggered by an intolerance of their feminine side. Pathologically triggered. You have to take that into account if you're a woman politician, because you don't want to trigger these men. And that comes more easily to some people. Michelle Obama is very good at not triggering these men. It comes with difficulty for others. Hillary Clinton is exceedingly good at triggering these men. So, and I'm not praising or criticizing Hillary, I'm just making that observation about her. So, you can't say, well, I'm a feminist and these men are prejudiced, so I'm not going to pander to them. Well, you're going to lose. Right? So it doesn't work to say, thinking that this particular gesture is wrong, is misogynistic, even if millions of men will not like it. Therefore, I'm not going to change it. No, you have to adapt and adjust because you live in a prejudiced world. So there is no politics in this idea that so long as the response is misogynistic, you can ignore it, because that's our case of pretending you've persuaded people when you haven't, right? There's a very great danger to politics that acts as though it's persuaded people when it hasn't. So that's the first thing you have to concede. The second thing you have to concede specific about Kamala Harris is that even though Frank Latz is wrong, and I'll come to that in a second, in principle, I do think there is a problem with some of Kamala Harris's laughter, and there can be a problem with her voice that risks sounding in some of its undulations a little bit sneering. And feminist left-wing women are going to feel that and do feel that. So that's absolutely reasonable to point out, and it's not a sound position to say you can't say anything about Kamala's laugh. You can. Now, my view of Kamala is that she has integrity in personal life, and I think she's genuinely warm, but finds it hard to translate in personal life, but finds it hard to translate that in the public realm, particularly under certain formats. And that's why some of her very best and most natural public interactions are actually interactions she has with children, where she is more easily able to demonstrate her warmth. So having made these concessions around it being possible to discuss faults with Kamala's presentation, and it being possible to be pragmatic, necessary to be pragmatic around dealing with a prejudiced population, I don't think Kamala's reactions to Trump as he was speaking were anything like what Frank Vlad says they were. I think they were superb. They were 8.5 out of 10. They were superb. They were not too much. They were just the right amount of engagement, disengagement, seriousness, lightness, and dismissiveness. They were not just appropriate, they were effective. She did a lot of damage to Trump with these facial expressions as he spoke, and they were well balanced. So Frank Lutz has completely misread this in the way it will impact most Americans, in my assessment. Let's get into the details of the debate. And here we'll just point out a few of the things Trump got wrong. Some of them are less interesting, some of them are more interesting. Abortion. In the middle of the abortion discussion, Trump lapsed into talking about student loans. He couldn't keep to the subject. And then he partly disavowed J.D. Vance because he was asked, do you know that J.D. Vance has said that you'd veto a national abortion ban if some such thing appeared on your desk? And Trump said, well, I don't know what J.D. Vance said. He has his own views, but he wasn't speaking for me. On immigration, Trump had an absolute catastrophe because it's one of his most compelling points, right, vis-a-vis the voters that need to be persuaded who matter. In a very planned way, Kamala Harris inserted crowd size into the beginning of the immigration section. And instead of responding on immigration, Trump started talking about crowd sizes, scrambling, being incoherent. Then he finally regained ground, equalized the immigration debate between them, and then he lost track again when the issue of charges against him came up, and again he went off topic and started scrambling. So we'll discuss in a moment what the mechanisms are that are making it difficult for him to deal with this. But this is a sort of very difficult interaction of, on the one hand, narcissism, on the other hand, neurodiversity. It can be a very extraordinary and explosive mix. And he simply got scrambled up and baited to go off topic twice in the middle of a several minute long section on immigration. And we'll say more shortly about the sort of lie he made up about Haitian immigrants in Ohio eating pets. To which again Kamala Harris's reaction was perfect without words. There were just a few words. She said, talk about extreme. But her look did more than these words. And we'll talk about why that was very unproductive for Trump to go there with this example of made-up story about immigrants eating pets. Because the logic is impeccable, and Trump's used the logic very well. You might think, well, that's just silly, it's not going to work. It is going to work in principle, because what he's doing there is exploiting people's capacity to be attracted to darkness. Trump does that a lot. Trump makes people compulsively engaged with dark forces inside them. He's very good at bringing that out in a way that serves him and works against his opponents. But in this case, as we'll explain shortly, I don't think it worked. Ukraine. I thought Ukraine was, interestingly, Trump's strongest topic, and I thought he either won it or drew on it. So I'm going to give him a marginal victory on Ukraine. And this is again where it's important to be clear-headed. If I'm an American citizen, Kamala Harris's answers satisfy me more, much more than Trump's do. So obviously she wins that for me, but it's not about me. It's about how this comes across to the voters who matter. Trump was asked, do you want to win this war? Do you want Ukraine to win this war? And Trump said, I want to stop the war. And I'm going to stop the war on day one. Kamala Harris said he'll sell Ukraine out. I'll give it to Trump. She would have won it if she had said, Trump's incompetent, he'll fumble, and he'll lose to Putin. He doesn't have any deal on the table. His ideas about the conflict are old ideas, small ideas, un-American ideas, and he has no deal on the table, and Putin and Zelensky think that he's incompetent. So it's a joke. So that polished, in a 15-minute session into something much more concise, would have won it for Kamala Harris. As it stands, I'll give it a draw or marginal win to Trump. On health, extraordinarily, Trump was asked, what's your plan? And he said, I have a concept of a plan. I have concepts of a plan. On Biden, Trump, in the most unbelievable way, missed an opportunity. And I don't know how that's possible, because it is almost inconceivable that members of his team would not tell him to go there. But it's also almost inconceivable that he himself wouldn't want to go. So that's an unbelievable bit of incompetence. That he never raised probably one of the two most powerful issues he should have raised in the debate. And that is a question to Kamala Harris. When did you first come to know about Joe Biden's cognitive decline? How long have you been lying to the country about it? And if I'm Trump's strategist, I press that in virtually every answer. Right? So your deceptive complicity in a puppet. Now, is Joe Biden actually a puppet? No, he's actually one of the most effective recent presidents the US has had. We did a lot of damage with this presidency because that extraordinary level of cognitive decline that he has suffered dramatically undermined trust in America. But in practical politics terms, Biden was far from a puppet. He was actually a more practically efficacious president than Barack Obama. But if you're a Trump strategist, you go with that line, and Trump just didn't do it. What's this business with Biden's cognitive decline? He had to step down because of it. But you would have known about it for a long time. Why didn't you say something? Who was running the country? Where were you? Right? Over and over and over. You guys are a joke. You guys are a sham. Extraordinary not to raise that. An unbelievable, bit of incompetence. And this is what takes us back to this question of democratic decline, because Kamala Harris is going up against a big wave, and the wave isn't Trump. It's anti-institutional politics that is the logical consequence of a crisis of trust. That's partly caused by things we can fix, partly caused by things we can't fix. That's to say, anybody who is half competent, plus also has Trump's communication skills, would create a situation where even a supreme performance every single day by Kamala Harris over the next few weeks couldn't give her a chance of winning, right? Somebody with 65% of the talent of Viktor Orban in Trump's position would make the election unwinnable for Kamala Harris. Could even make, and a full-scale Orban, with Orban's entire sort of range of political skills, would make it unwinnable even if Obama was running against him. That's the age we're in. It's a very difficult situation for Kamala Harris. So Trump is riding a wave that favors him, and he has some extraordinary political skills, and he is formidable, but he also has these unbelievably catastrophic modes of weakness and incompetence. That was an unbelievable missed opportunity. And he kept talking, this is another mistake he made, as though he were running against Biden, and Kamala Harris came up as planned with the line, "You're running against me and I'm not Joe Biden." And he didn't have anything to say about that. Closing remarks stood out most for another unbelievable own goal from Trump. It's only in the closing remarks that Trump raised the second of the two most important issues that he should have raised in this debate. One was, where were you when Biden was in cognitive decline, Vice President Harris? And the second issue is, you're proposing all of this stuff, but you've been in power for 3.5 years. So don't even go there. Don't even go there. Where were you for 3.5 years if you suddenly want to do all of these things and make the country better? Now, doesn't matter how unfair that line is, because quite a lot got done during the Biden administration. But that's the line he should have gone with each answer. Don't give me these pretty songs. 3.5 years in power for you. Don't tell me what you're going to do. It's extraordinary that got raised at the end. Unbelievable incompetence. Another bit of incompetence from Trump is what I've called algorithm capture. So this story about immigrants, this lie about immigrants eating pets, which comes from partly a real story of a non-immigrant eating a cat or a dog, I don't remember, cat, and a bullshit Facebook post. That's not known outside a certain demographic of people who are quite online. So using that as an example to sort of evoke forces of darkness in people is not effective, because not everyone's going to have purchase on the example. He mentioned Orban positively. Orban is everywhere on the populist right internet. But most Americans don't know who Orban is. It's a bit like you and I talking about something, and then me coming out of my window, screaming down to people walking by, saying, "What do you think of Prigozhin?" Well, yes, I happen to interact with people from Sweden and Canada and New Zealand who know who Prigozhin is, but most Brits in London have no idea who Prigozhin is. You know, so if I shout at somebody, "Oh, look at you, you baldy, you look like Prigozhin," they're not going to know what's going on. That is a line that, if I deploy outside of my window, would indicate that I'm a little bit caught up in my internet bubble. So in terms of missed opportunities, to refresh, I think Kamala Harris could have been stronger on Ukraine. I think if her performance were to be even more formidable than it was, at the end, she could have said, "Look at how badly he got triggered and distracted during this debate. He's not a serious person." You know, a mention. I said at the beginning that he would go off script and get triggered. Then things I said triggered him. Just the mention of crowd size triggered him, spiraled him out of control. He couldn't stay on topic. That happened again and again. This is not a serious person. I said what I was going to do. I did it. It derailed him like a baby. And now I'm telling you, I telegraphed what I was going to do. I did it. The results were going to be obvious. And here we are. We've just seen them. And this person is not serious, right? Condense that into just a single powerful sentence. That would have been even more compelling. And Trump missed, of course, centrally the point about Biden's cognitive decline and Kamala Harris's responsibility there. And he missed the point about where were you 3.5 years. So let's talk a little bit about this interaction of narcissism, and because we're online, I'm going to say allegedly ADHD in Trump. So you've got this situation where the presidency is almost in his reach. He is a favorite or a marginal favorite in my assessment. And his blend of narcissism, neurodiversity, interaction between the two just makes him scupper his own momentum toward a goal that is almost in his grasp. He couldn't get over the fact that he's not running against Biden and kept compulsively being triggered about that. He wasn't able to listen to his team properly. He got caught out again for his erratic behavior when the moderators asked him, what was this you said to Lex Friedman when you said that you actually lost the election by a whisker? And his reaction was, oh, did I say that? I don't remember. Oh yeah, it was definitely sarcastic, which it wasn't. So going off script, being loose, and then walking into the spin room, which is very procedurally atypical. He ended up talking to Hannity, but he talked to lots of people, and he went there because he knew he lost. But it is extraordinary. I'm not necessarily even saying that it was counterproductive for him to go there, but it is extraordinary illustration of the interaction of ADHD and narcissism, how his ADHD fuels his narcissism. And of course, his narcissism fuels his ADHD. And allegedly. And the debate is over, and he has to go there. He doesn't know what he's going to do there, what he's going to say. He just has to go there. He's suddenly there, and it looks strange, and he's making his points. Straight away talking about polls that have come in that indicated he won the debate. When he was asked what these polls were, he changed the subject. So in many ways, this is a communicator of genius who is also profoundly victimized by his interaction of narcissism, which would qualify under some, we don't want to get into these bureaucratic categories of narcissistic personality disorder, but let's just call it narcissism and neurodiversity interacting in this extraordinary way. And there's this scene of Trump about a year ago, maybe more, where he's finished an event and he compulsively cannot stop signing something for people, pieces of paper, some kind of items, and telling them, oh, if you sell this on eBay, it's going to go for a lot of money. He just couldn't leave, and his entourage wanted him to leave. He just couldn't leave. He just kept saying, you're going to make a lot of profit. I'm going to sign it for you. Okay, you want it to, I'm going to sign it for you too. He just couldn't stop himself. So in many ways, that means that if Kamala Harris performs superbly and consistently over the next few weeks, she can win. Now, you've got to understand that we're talking about really tens of thousands of voters in a handful of states who are going to decide this. This is close. This is going to be difficult. And I would still say it's just about Trump's to lose still, but it's getting closer now. And the way Trump is going, it's a reasonable bet to say that if Kamala Harris performs superbly between now and however many weeks we have left, she's probably going to win. It's still with Trump for me, but the margins are certainly finer after this debate performance, which mattered, right? This old myth that debates don't matter doesn't apply to this time, even if it did apply to some other historical moments. So that's it. I'll give myself about a 4 out of 10 for this. This was too rambly, but I tried. And I'm going to give an update about the YouTube problem my channels have run into with the so-called invalid traffic bug on the community posts. Thank you so much for being with me.